In the summer of 1943, after the invasion of Sicily, thousands of Italian soldiers found themselves in American POW camps scattered across the United States. They arrived exhausted, demoralized, uncertain whether they would live or die. The Italians had been taught to expect brutality. They had learned war from the Germans, who understood only domination. Instead, they found baseball fields, rations that didn't make them sick, and guards who smiled. The Americans seemed soft, unprepared for real war. The way they moved, talked, even stood. It suggested abundance, not hunger. They played games in their free time instead of sharpening blades or preparing for the next assault. Italian officers watching from behind barbed wire saw this and felt something shift. Perhaps survival was possible. Perhaps these Americans, with their optimism and their lack of visible cruelty, could be managed, could be understood, could be exploited. But the baseball games revealed something the Italian POWs had misunderstood entirely. It wasn't the game itself that mattered. It was what the game proved about the men who played it. By late summer, when the guards organized a game between camp teams, prisoners versus soldiers, the Italians began to see the machinery beneath the smile. Confidence, they realized too late, was not the absence of ruthlessness. It was something harder. It was the certainty that you would win regardless of what your opponent did. This is the story of what happens when men schooled in fear encounter men who have never needed to show it, and what it costs them to understand the difference. Chapter 1. The Diamond in the Desert. The camp sprawled across flat New Mexico scrubland, dust rising in sheets whenever the wind shifted. Compound C held 400 Italian prisoners, mostly enlisted men, a handful of junior officers confined to separate barracks. Corporal Vittorio Benedetti stood at the fence line in the early morning, watching American soldiers rake the baseball diamond into shape. He had seen many things in 3 years of war. The collapse of the Italian army in North Africa, the chaos of the invasion, the surrender that felt less like politics and more like drowning. But he had never seen this, men preparing a game with the same attention they gave to rifle maintenance. "They're children," muttered Sergeante Moretti beside him, spitting into the dust, "playing games while the world burns." Vittorio said nothing. His uniform hung loose on his frame. The American food, canned beans, powdered eggs, beef they called mystery meat, didn't taste like home, but it kept the hunger at bay. That alone was a mercy he hadn't expected. The guards wore khaki and moved with an easiness that seemed almost obscene. They weren't the lean, hard men Vittorio had known in the Wehrmacht units he'd served alongside. These Americans had the look of men who had never truly missed a meal. Their rifles hung from their shoulders like appendages they'd forgotten they carried. On the morning the guards announced there would be a baseball game, prisoners versus soldiers, Vittorio felt a sharp, almost physical sensation of possibility. The Americans would play, they would be casual, there would be confusion, disorder. The fence was old. The guards rotated in patterns. A man could watch those patterns, learn them, anticipate them. Moretti gripped his arm. "Do you understand what this means?" Vittorio did. It meant the Americans weren't prepared for war. They were playing at it. Chapter 2. The game begins. The afternoon heat pressed down like a fist. Vittorio played left field, his movements economical, a man conserving strength. The American soldier pitched with a loose-armed throw, almost dismissive in its ease. The ball arrived slower than Vittorio expected. He watched it come and felt something like contempt. Around the diamond the guards stood with their rifles held negligently. Some smiled. One sat on a bench eating an apple, his weapon resting against the seat beside him. The American players, cooks, mechanics, supply men, moved with an almost theatrical confidence. They didn't prepare between pitches. They didn't crouch, waiting. They stood upright, relaxed, as if the outcome had already been decided, and they were merely performing it. Vittorio hit the second pitch into the gap. He ran, his legs remembering discipline, remembering the drills they'd done in training. The American outfielder turned his back and jogged to retrieve the ball, then threw it with a casual arc to the second baseman. The motion was smooth, unhurried, perfect. He slid into second base and felt the dust enter his throat. Around the field, the American soldiers cheered for their teammate who had made the throw. They were cheering, celebrating precision while the opponent advanced. By the fourth inning, Vittorio understood that the Italians were losing badly. The Americans batted through their order twice. The prisoners couldn't match their coordination or strength. And yet, and this was the thing that began to trouble him, the Americans never seemed to be trying very hard. One guard trotted out to relieve the pitcher, a man named Colloway, whom Vittorio had seen at the commissary. Colloway threw harder, much harder, and when an Italian batter connected and sent a line drive toward right field, Colloway wheeled and tracked it like a hunting dog tracking blood, then threw the runner out at first with a throw that arrived like a bullet. Moretti, sitting in the prisoner's dugout, leaned toward Vittorio. "Did you see that?" "Yes," Vittorio whispered. "They're not playing at this. They're good at this." Chapter 3. The Recognition. By the end of the game, the Americans had won by 8 runs. The prisoners filed back through the gates, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the heat or the physical exertion. Vittorio's mind was moving in circles, trying to rearrange what he had assumed into something that made sense. The guard named Colloway stood at the gate, still smiling, rifle slung across his back. He nodded to the prisoners as they passed, as if they were all friends who had simply been on opposing teams in a friendly contest. Not enemies, not prisoners, just others. That evening, Moretti gathered a small group in the barracks. His voice was urgent, pitched low beneath the sound of men settling for the night. "We were wrong about them," he said. "The Americans. They're not soft because they're weak. They're soft because they don't need to be hard. They have so much that cruelty would be redundant." Vittorio sat on his bunk, processing. "What does that mean for us?" "It means," said Moretti slowly, "that we can't exploit them the way we thought. We can't find the cracks. There aren't any. They don't break because they've never been broken. They don't fear us because they've never had a reason to fear anything." An older officer, Tenente Rossi, spoke from the darkness. "It means they'll win whatever they try to win, and they know it. That's why they smiled while they played. They weren't fighting us. They were showing us what the end of the war already looks like." Vittorio felt the weight of understanding settle on him like a physical thing. If this story feels real to you, tell us in the comments. What would you have done in their place? Chapter 4. The Letters. August turned toward September. The camp fell into a routine that felt almost peaceful in its predictability. Roll call, work assignments, rations, and the Americans moving through their duties with that same unshakable confidence. Vittorio was assigned to the kitchen, peeling vegetables alongside an older prisoner named Giacomo, who had lost 2 sons in North Africa. One morning, a guard named Patterson left a newspaper on the counter, carelessly as if it were nothing. The headline spoke of American production figures: tanks manufactured, ships launched, ammunition produced, numbers that seemed invented, quantities so vast they bent the mind toward disbelief. Giacomo read it while stirring soup and began to laugh, a thin, hollow sound. "Do you understand? They could make 10 of everything we make, 20. They're not confident because they're arrogant. They're confident because they've counted the score and already know who wins." That afternoon, prisoners received mail. Vittorio had a letter from his wife in Milan. She wrote of shortages, of rubble from the bombings, of fear. At the bottom, in handwriting so small he had to squint, she wrote, "When will you come home?" He folded the letter carefully, as if the creases were important, and watched through the kitchen window as American soldiers carried boxes of supplies from trucks. The boxes were marked with unit designations, destination codes, endless logistical precision. The Americans organized their abundance with the same methodical care that desperate men devoted to scarcity. Patterson walked past the window carrying his rifle in one hand and a sandwich in the other. He wasn't watching the prisoners. He was reading a baseball score in a newspaper he'd tucked under his arm. The thought of home so casual, so peripheral, that it could be consumed between bites of lunch. That evening Moretti met with Vittorio again. Two men tried to escape last night from Compound B. They made it past the first fence. And the guards brought them back before dawn. No violence, just returned them, like they were pieces that had fallen off a table. Chapter 5. The Machinery. Revealed by October, the war news grew worse for the Axis, or rather, the American newspapers made it clear that the Axis had already lost, and now it was simply a matter of counting the cost. Sicily was secure. The Italians had switched sides. The Germans were being pressed in the Soviet Union, and the Americans, with their inexhaustible supplies and their discipline born not from fear but from unlimited resources, continued their methodical advance. A transport arrived with new prisoners, Germans mostly, captured in North Africa. They were different, leaner, harder, moving with the tensed awareness of men who had survived actual combat. They took in the camp and the guards with the eye of soldiers assessing a battlefield. That first evening, one of the German officers, Hauptsturmführer Keller, was processed through the American checkpoint. Vittorio watched from a distance as Keller's jaw tightened when he saw the baseball equipment, the recreation yard, the guards moving with their hands often away from their weapons. He heard Keller say something to an American officer, something in broken English about no real discipline. The American smiled and shrugged. "We don't need discipline the way you do. We have something better. We have faith that we're going to win regardless." Keller's face hardened. He understood, Vittorio realized. The German understood what the Italian POWs had taken weeks to grasp. Confidence wasn't a mask. It was the truth. Over the following weeks, Vittorio noticed the German prisoners trying things, small provocations, tests of the boundaries, attempts to find weakness in the structure. The Americans responded with a consistency that was almost mathematical. Never angry, never harsh, simply immobile. The rules existed. The rules would be enforced. Whether the prisoner cooperated or not, the outcome was predetermined. One evening, Moretti said, "The Germans think they can find a way out. They still believe in strength, in will, in the possibility of changing the rules through force or cleverness." "And us?" Vittorio asked. "We're beginning to understand there's nothing to break. The Americans aren't powerful because they're hard. They're powerful because they're abundant. You can't defeat that with anything except time and surrender." Chapter 6. The Second Game. Late October brought cooler weather and a second baseball game, this time with mixed teams. The Americans paired themselves with Italian prisoners, teaching them the rules, laughing at mistakes, celebrating small victories with the same generosity they'd shown when winning decisively. Vittorio was partnered with a guard named Sullivan, a man from Chicago who had worked as a machinist before the war. Sullivan threw the ball to him with patient precision, correcting his stance with a hand on his shoulder. "Keep your elbow up. You've got the strength. You just don't know you've got it yet." The touch was casual, almost fraternal. Not the touch of a captor, not even the touch of a soldier, the touch of a man who had confidence enough to help an enemy learn. That evening, after the game, which the mixed teams had played for fun rather than victory, Vittorio sat with his back against the barracks and watched the sun decline. Moretti appeared beside him silently. "I received word," Moretti said, "that the war in Europe will be over in less than a year, maybe less. The Germans can't hold." Vittorio nodded. He had always known this, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a different way. And then, Moretti continued, we go home, we rebuild, we become the defeated, and America becomes what? The new Rome, the new Germany. Something different, Vittorio said. Something we don't have a word for yet. Moretti was quiet for a long moment. Sullivan asked me today if I wanted to learn English. Properly, not just kitchen words. He said it would help after the war. What did you say? I said yes. If this battle still echoes in your mind, hit like it helps these untold memories stay alive. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. November brought rain to the desert, and with it a letter from the Red Cross. Vittorio's wife had made it to Switzerland. She was safe. She was waiting. He read the letter twice, each time seeing something different. Relief, certainly, but also the strange ache of knowing that the world she had survived in was not the world he had come to understand in this camp. On the day the news came that the Italians had formally joined the Allies, the American commander gave a speech to both compounds. He spoke without anger about the war, about duty, about the difference between a nation and its government. He spoke about the future as if it were already written. Afterward, guards and prisoners moved past each other with a choreography that seemed almost ceremonial. The Americans offered cigarettes. Some of the prisoners accepted, others declined. No one fought, no one spat. No one tried to escape or challenge authority. The structure had become so evident that rebellion seemed almost quaint, the gesture of a man trying to push against a mountain. Vittorio found Sullivan working on one of the barracks doors, replacing a hinge. He asked if he could help. Sullivan handed him tools and showed him how to align the frame. They worked in silence for nearly an hour. When they finished, Sullivan wiped his hands on his trousers and said, "You know the war's really over, don't you? I don't mean in Europe. I mean here. For you. For all of you." Vittorio understood. The war of resistance, of defiance, of the possibility that they might somehow reverse what had already been decided, that war had ended. What remained was simply the waiting for the official conclusion. "Yes," Vittorio said, "I know." "Good," Sullivan replied. He held out his hand, not as a superior to a prisoner, not even as one soldier to another, but as a man to a man who had begun to see what he was seeing. "When you go home, don't forget that there's another way to be strong. You don't have to break things to build them." Vittorio shook the hand. He thought of his wife in Switzerland. He thought of the cities that would need rebuilding. He thought of Moretti learning English, and the German prisoners still waiting for a leverage that would never come. And the slow understanding that the confidence of the Americans wasn't cruelty in disguise. It was the certainty of men who had enough and who had already decided how the world would be shaped. By the time the war ended in Europe, Vittorio had learned enough English to understand jokes. He had also learned that confidence, when truly earned, needed no performance. The Americans never raised their voices. They never needed to. They had already won before the first game was played. The prisoners went home to a continent in ruins, but some of them carried something else back. The understanding that power wasn't always visible in cruelty, and that the future belonged not to those who broke things hardest, but to those who had the confidence to build them. That knowledge, silent, unspeakable to those who had survived the old wars, became the inheritance of those who had lived through the new one. Subscribe for more true human stories of courage, conscience, and the wars that never really end.